Welcome back, everyone, to the Risk Intel podcast, powered by SRA Watchtower, where we share risk intelligence with experts from across the banking industry. I'm your host, Ed Vincent, CEO at SRA Watchtower. Welcome to the Risk Intel podcast. I am happy to have back with me here today Niki White, the Chief Growth Officer at SRA Watchtower and former auditor and risk officer in financial institutions in prior lives. So Niki, thank you for joining us today and bringing your perspective both from inside and outside our four walls to the table.
I'm very excited about the topic today.
We were talking recently about this phrase or this concept of starting where you are, right? I know this has been something that has crossed your path a few times recently. So let's begin by defining what does that mean, and then why is it on the table today? Why are we discussing it?
A lot of times when people are talking to us or thinking about starting a risk management program or thinking about maturing a risk program, they can tend to get overwhelmed by the thought of having a fully fleshed out plan before they take that first step. So what we often end up having a conversation about is, I'm frozen. I can't move forward. But just expressing, just get started, just take that first step. Getting out of the starting gate is more important than having a fully fleshed out plan before you get started.
All right, so getting out of the starting gate is more important than having a full lockdown plan. Understood. You're hearing this now manifest itself in the risk management space where folks saying, right, I think I want to work with you, but I'm not, things are not fully fleshed out yet. Mm-hmm. So what's a better approach then, right? What's the alternative, right, to doing all that work, doing all that advanced, right, investment? Is there a better approach?
I like to think about it in kind of 4 steps: learn, adapt, adjust, and iterate. And when you think about that, if you think about formulating an entire plan of start to finish, here's all the people, here's all the processes, here's all the data, you may find that you just get completely entangled. So take a moment and learn, but a moment, not a year. And that's what I find is that people often get stuck at that step. So learn what you can learn what is useful, and then take that first step, but then be prepared to adapt. And that's like a second misstep that we often see too, is when you've got that fully fleshed out plan, you are in between the guardrails. You're driving down the highway, you've got the girders up on either side of you, and you can't change lanes. Well, what if that road is not the road that you want to be on anymore? You don't have the ability to adapt because you have a beautiful presentation that has been presented to the board and fully committed to, and that this is the end date and the end place that you're going to end, but you don't need to be there anymore. You've learned something through that second step as you got started, and it's more difficult to course correct in that. So to get out of the starting gate, learn what you need to know to get started, and then take that step. Adapt based on what you learn in that step, but then adjust your behavior, adjust your approach. Needing to communicate, of course, because you still ultimately want to make sure that if you do make an adjustment, that it is in alignment with where everybody wants to go and where the institution's actual needs are, and in alignment with the board or executive management's desires for where you want the program to be. But being prepared and at the onset knowing that you intend to adjust as you go is a critical step. And I think about adjust a little bit different than I think about iterate. Adjustment is maybe needing to take a turn. Iterate is making a tweak, switching lanes as opposed to going around the block. Turn right, don't turn left. And think about how you want to cycle through and how you want to refine your approach to just continue to tweak it and make it better. So maybe you come up with a standard basic set of KRIs that you want to measure, that you want to look at, and you find that maybe you have a qualitative factor. There's something that's important to you. You say, when I'm sitting down and thinking about this, when we talk about risk management, this is a factor. I can't quantify it yet. It's a feeling, not a fact. But if you add a qualitative element to your risk reporting and to your risk profile, then you can say over time, I'm going to replace this qualitative factor, this qualitative rating, if you will, in your reporting with something that is more concrete. Iterate that, adjust that, incorporate that into your next version.
All right, so I'm going to steal some terminology from the software development world of really progressing from a waterfall approach where everything is fully mapped out to more of an agile approach where you identify what a minimum viable product looks like, you get that out, and then you collect feedback and you adjust and you iterate and you cycle again, and then you've got a second release and a third release and so on and so forth. So right, it's pretty simple, contrast that if you're having problems getting out of the starting gate and if something is not fully locked down, accept that it doesn't need to be fully locked down, fully planned out, and just get after it. Get out of the starting gate. What are the consequences then if you do take this approach and you take this kind of thin sliver, minimum viable product approach, and then you get out of the starting gate and do in fact iterate and cycle through it? What are the consequences, good or bad, of taking this approach?
Well, I always tend to think about what can go wrong first. So I'll start with that route. Think about your culture. Does your culture require or expect that you need a full plan, that you need to know every dollar that you're going to spend and every resource that's going to be there? And do you have to assign a project manager, and do you have to have someone from every department? If that is how you tend to manage projects, then this approach may be difficult for you. But conversely, you have to decide too, if you're willing to spend the money later, a year, 2 years, 3 years down the road, to say, we got to scrap this and start over. Because as you mentioned, thinking about the difference between waterfall and agile, sometimes where you end up is no longer what your business needs. And you really have to shift gears. And thinking about the program that you build, whether it's in-house or whether it's bought, whether you have the ability to configure it or whether you have to go back to the provider to code software, whether those are external software developers or internal software developers, it all comes with a cost. So building out a program that can iterate with you, that you can quickly make changes and configure, so that it can adapt and can be as fluid as you are in your process. So the downside would be, if you have a culture that really directs that you have that fully fleshed out plan, that could be a negative consequence. But the positive alternative of that is, if you can overcome that, then you resist the urge to overbuild something, or you resist the urge that you build something that is unusable, or that if there's turnover, it has to be completely undone because someone else can't pick it up and take it from where you go, if it can't be easily iterated.
There's the risk then, or the con and the pro there, of how much are you going to invest in this area? Is your organization willing to change? And are you willing to accept that maybe an action that's taken doesn't prove to be right, and you're willing to walk away from that? So there are some significant cultural aspects there, I think, that are important. I think you also highlighted the fact that the market is moving quickly, right? I mean, if we think back over the last 12, 24 months, right, if you had a plan that did not consider fintechs, AI, speed of movement of deposits and liquidity impact, right, tightening of the credit markets, right, if your plan doesn't think about contemplate those things, and you've got that plan locked down, you're going to be left behind. By the time you get to your end state, you're not going to recognize the market that's around you. So I think that there's a lot to be said there around that kind of thin slice MVP iterative concept.
And one other piece that didn't touch on just yet before we move to the next question is, if you are working on that full plan and are trying to incorporate and encounter all factors, you may never get out of the starting gate.
It's a great point, right? Bit of analysis paralysis, if you will, there, right? We can think, we can debate until the cows come home, but right, we need to get moving, especially in a market that is moving. All right, so let's take the leap here and say, the organization's bought in, right? Yep, right. You've got support for this concept of getting out of the starting gate. How the heck do you do that?
Well, as you opened with in my introduction, I'm a CPA by background. That's where my career really kicked off. So one of my favorite things to do was to take inventory during audits. So I always encourage people to take inventory. Take inventory of the people that you have, and within those people that you have, what level of awareness of risk do they possess, and what needs to be developed? Do you need to do some training? Do you need to do some socialization and education about the concepts of what you're trying to build so that they can provide meaningful input? Take inventory of your understanding of risks. What kind of risk documentation do you already have in existence? What kind of, as I mentioned about the qualitative factors, what kind of risks do you have that you haven't really captured anywhere because they're in someone's head? Socialize that and allow that to become a part of that inventory that you build into that first pass, because then something else might be inspirational to say, oh, well, now that this person in this department is talking about this risk that has persisted, I actually have something like that too, but it looks like this in my world. So figuring out where you have those holes of and starting to fill them in. So you've got an inventory list, but maybe there's something that you need to have in there that you don't have. And then, what do you want to know, but that you don't yet have the data to start? Look at that. Here's a feeling, and here's a system that needs to be built or some data that needs to be captured. Well, don't wait until you build the system to capture that data. Start doing it in tandem, because you may find that, as you said, the requirements may change over time, and that data either may be easier to get to than you thought, or it may suddenly become irrelevant as you are persisting. And if you decide that that data is not relevant, then in theory you could have started earlier.
Right. So starting with, even if you start on a qualitative level, start capturing the data, and it evolves to then be, a quantified metric. You've given yourself a fighting chance, because you're not, again, just sitting around waiting and over planning. You're in the game there, so to speak.
Absolutely. And just be sure that you have a feedback mechanism throughout the entire process so that people can insert their information, or if there needs to be a correction or a change or a tweak, to say, oh, nope, raise my hand, here's the way we need to go. Here's what this really looks like, and being able to change. So having that feedback mechanism to be able to iterate and to adjust and to adapt.
All right, Nikki, you've given folks, I think, a good understanding of why getting out of the starting gate is a better approach, the consequences of taking that approach, and then how you do it. So I'd ask everyone really to think about this topic of whether or not you are in fact ready to embark on a risk management journey, or embracing a culture of risk, or whatever it is. You don't need to be fully ready to get out of the starting gate, right? You need to have a desire to move forward, and then be willing to iterate and respond and react and change throughout that journey.
Take the first step.
Thanks, Nikki. Appreciate the time.
Absolutely.